This is the Leap Motion, a hand and gesture tracking device for use in virtual reality or other developing areas around gestural inputs for digital interfaces. It can track two hands at the same time with good precision and zero latency, almost zero latency. It's a cool thing. It's cool. Take money from the rich and give it to John. Stream his music, master's archive. All day long, all day long, all day long, all day long. Give it for someone that is into expressive sound design and somewhat of a collector of objects that interface with digital audio processing, this thing is a dream come true. And I've only heard about it in a video that didn't have very many views. It was on Touch Designer, which is a program that I'm starting to use, and it's quite big, so I'm not going to go into that here, but it is something I'm looking into for a future video. But it was Touch Designer, and these guys were using this thing called a Leap Motion, and he said it's a motion tracker, and it looked really interesting. So I wanted to know what this Leap Motion thing is. One Google search got me there. Videos of hands being tracked flawlessly in virtual reality. Graphical user interfaces in there that just use gestures instead of controllers. A pipe dream. Click on Find a Retailer. How much would this hurt my wallet? 90 euros actually, and that's way less than I expected. I thought this thing was going to be way more expensive. So I ordered one. And there was a little bit of delay. You know, the coronavirus was there, but it also had to come from America, from Texas, I believe. But a week later, maybe a little bit more, and I got it in the mail. So what is in this thing? How does it work? Inside this little iPhone-looking device is at least one camera and some flashing LEDs, and I'm not sure what those do. The camera has a ridiculously wide field of view, and it can capture quite a big area around it that way. But it's not the camera inside it that's interesting. It's the software inside that interprets what it is looking at, and it can interpret a lot. X-axis, Y-axis, Z-axis, pitch, roll, yaw, finger spread, individual finger tracking, pinch gesture, grab strength, circle gesture, swipe gesture. And that's all with just one hand. It can do two hands at the same time. It gets a little tough for my brain to understand when I'm using two hands though, so I limit myself to just one hand. And there's a wonderful program that can use all this data. It sends over USB, it sends its data over USB, and Touch Designer is a thing that has a wonderful implementation. But like I said before in the beginning of this video, Touch Designer is a subject for another video. Now let's get into the meat of it. How do we as musicians get the data from the Leap Motion into our DAW, in my case, Ableton? Well, I'm using this program here you can see on the screen, which is called Gecko Midi, or just Gecko, G-E-C-O. And it works really well. You have to fiddle with it a little bit in settings to get it to work well. I'm not going to go into that in this video. I might do a Patreon video that really informs you about the whole thing. But for this video, it's just inspiration. And Gecko tracks the movement and sends it out as MIDI, which is really slick. It can also send over OSC. So if you want to do any video work with higher bits than just your 127 levels, then you can do that with Gecko as well. So that's really nice. You can see it lights up whenever I move my hand, and it sends it over to Ableton. But there is a middleman involved because you need to send it over a virtual MIDI cable, which is luckily not a virtual audio cable because those are kind of fiddly. And the virtual MIDI cable is called Loop Midi, and it's a simple little program. You add a port and your computer automatically sees the extra MIDI port, and then Ableton can also see that MIDI port in your computer and send and receive over that new so-called cable. So now Ableton and Gecko can communicate. I'm really only receiving data from Gecko. I'm not sending stuff back to Gecko because that doesn't do anything. So I'm receiving data from Gecko. And in Ableton it looks like this. Here at number 5 there's the loop MIDI port 1, loop MIDI port 1 on both the input and the output. I went a little further than that because this works, and then you can map your MIDI controls to whatever you want it to do. But here you can see I have a control surface, which is called CSS Gecko Automap. Now if I put it on none, I can go inside my Ableton and just MIDI map something, whatever, and now I can change this gain output on this thing. It's hard to tell which parameter it's supposed to be right now, honestly. Is it the throttle? Oh, well, it's reacting to it. You can see how annoying it is to map this. Ways around that, but it's kind of annoying to do that. Oh, it's doing something. There we go. It's very reactive, apparently. I think I got it. Anyways, it's annoying. So I went a little further than that by making a remote script. So we're going to edit the MIDI map. So what did I do? I made a remote script with Control Surface Studio, which is by Remotify, which is a paid application, and I made a faux controller here with 6 sliders, one for the X movement, one for the I movement, Y movement, one for the Z movement, Z, and then we have pitch, roll, and yaw. So I mapped them all to sliders, and it thinks that this is just a controller with sliders now. Now in Remotify, you can do really interesting stuff where Ableton automatically maps those parameters to things. Maybe you've had controllers that automatically map to your selected track or something. This can make that for you. You don't have to program it yourself. It's amazing. So what it does now is if I select my CSS Gecko auto map and I open, for instance, Massive. Now there's a couple things that are already mapped, so it's not going to work fully. But if I open up Massive here, you can see, of course, it doesn't want to work. You have to, if I select it, you can see that there's some macro knobs moving. So it's taking the first 6 parameters and it's moving them around according to what Gecko is sending them. And that's really slick and very powerful for when you do a more playful or experimental type of thing, or have a session where you just want to, mess around with some sounds. Of course, it's kind of annoying that it maps those 6 parameters, because if you want to just play with the original thing, you have to be very careful that you don't move your hand over it, because it's going to change 6 parameters at the same time. It's kind of annoying. So you have to be thoughtful of when you turn this thing on and when you turn it off. But it is really good for experimentation. But what good is experimentation and playing around with a thing like this if you can't actually make music with it? So let's make some music with it. Alright, some notes from the John that's editing right now. I finished the song, and while it's not the most impressive piece of music, I know that I did find it kind of hard to work with the leap motion for a couple of reasons. Kind of how, the tracking, when you get the parameters that are automatically mapped, it is kind of annoying sometimes. It's when you're trying to play it back, it's still trying to record new automation on this thing, so you have to really turn it off in multiple menus. Actually, I have to turn it off in Ableton and Gecko for some reason, so that's kind of annoying. And I think I know the main reason why this is not a very popular thing. There's no feedback. You don't feel what you're doing. And so the Expressive E Touché is an alternative with less axes, less movement that you can use, but you get feedback. You can feel the thing. And I think this could be changed with things like haptic feedback in midair, or AR, that you can actually see the axes, the sliders, color information, something to provide some feedback with what you're doing, because it's really hard to tell what you're doing with the leap motion. Don't get me wrong, it's still a very cool piece of tech, but it's hard to use. Then again, what instrument isn't hard to use? So maybe I just need a little bit more practice with it, and I will keep using the leap motion because it is really neat. But it is kind of hard to work, and I think that's because of the amount of feedback that you don't have. Anyway, that's unscripted piece of information from Editor John. Back to me from the now past. Whatever. But more of the video. So this thing opens up some wild new doors for touching our sound. Except we don't really touch it because there's no haptic feedback on this one. Because there is one that does have haptic feedback, which is amazing, but it's like $12,000. Ain't nobody got money for that. But it's pretty cool. This works well. But are they really new doors that we're opening? No. Because this thing was announced officially in 2012. Released 2013. It's been in development since 2010. So this thing has been worked on for 10 years. Released for 7 years. And I only found this thing a month ago, which is wild to me. So let's look at the Mimu gloves real quick. The Imogen Heap things where she wears them and goes on stage and waves around wildly and goes "Ooh" with them. Yeah, those. That's $1,000+ for one of these gloves. It's $2,500 or euros, I'm not sure, for 2 gloves. So 2 hand controls, and this is not even 100. So this is 1/25th of the price of the Mimu gloves. But the Mimu gloves seem wildly more popular, or well known at least. I don't think many people are buying them because they're quite expensive and they seem kind of niche, just like this thing. And of course, they have a wider movement range. You're not tethered to a little box. But still, why did this thing flop? I think, honestly, it was ahead of its time. When it came out, 2013, VR was in its infancy. It was not good. The Oculus Rift was barely a thing back then. And now we have these 144 hertz screens. We got Half-Life Alyx really showing us what we can do in VR, but we're still stuck with the controllers, which are really cool. I haven't used the controllers in VR yet, but this is no controller. You can look up videos about this thing where people are using their hands and getting graphical user interfaces with just gestures, which to me seems more immersive than clicking a button. Might be me though. It's a real shame that this thing kind of flopped, because I think if it were picked up a little bit better, then there would be more stuff like this out there. But for now, I'll be having fun doing weird gestures in the air with a leap motion. So, there are buttons to press underneath this video. You probably know how that works. There's music to stream all day long. It's by me. It's my master's archive. And I'll probably be working again on my Patreon page, where I'll probably be posting more in-depth videos that don't, do the inspiration thing, but more of the information thing. So if you really want to know about how the whole Gecko thing setup works and the loop MIDI routing, if you want to know all that, I think that's a good place to go. That's under development, as is everything. And there are about 300 to 1,100 million tits in a 34 million square kilometer place. I wanted to know the population of tits. So now you also get to know the population of tits. I'm talking about the birds. It's wild to me. So many more people on planet Earth than there are tits. So how does that... Yeah. John Suey, up to heaven. Again. I really shouldn't make this a